London, 1891. The rain had just stopped when the constable entered a small tailor's shop and froze. There, in the center of the room, stood a man, perfectly upright, eyes open, dead. No struggle, no wound, no explanation. He simply never fell. By the time Sherlock Holmes arrived, the body had been moved, but not the mystery. The position of a cufflink, a speck of ash on the carpet, and the faint scent of varnish told him everything the corpse could not. Because sometimes the greatest clue isn't how a man lived, but how he refused to fall after death. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if mysteries like this make your pulse quicken, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because every week a new impossible case awaits from Baker Street. Now, pick up your cup of tea, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself. This is Sherlock Holmes and the Man Who Died Standing Up. Chapter 1. The Man Who Died Standing Up. It was in the brisk chill of an October morning, one whose mist seemed unwilling to lift even as the sun crept above the rooftops of London, that the case first came to our attention. I had just returned from an early appointment with a patient near Kensington, and I found Holmes standing by the fireplace in our Baker Street lodgings. The morning paper spread across the table beside an untouched cup of tea. He did not look up as I entered, but instead said, "You are earlier than expected, Watson. Was your man malingering, or merely disappointed that you were not bringing a miracle cure?" "Neither," I replied, peeling off my gloves. "A touch of melancholia, perhaps. Nothing beyond rest and diversion." I poured myself a cup of the cold tea, already certain Holmes would not have brewed another. "And yourself?" "Quiet morning." Holmes finally turned toward me, his eyes alert, though his pose remained languid. "Not quite. We may have an engagement shortly. Lestrade is on his way," I said, my interest piqued. "A matter of importance, I take it?" Holmes lifted the newspaper and handed it to me, pointing at a short column buried near the bottom of the second page. "Unusual death at Bloomsbury Club. A prominent club member was discovered lifeless in the club's billiard room early this morning. The deceased, one Mr. Philip Darnley, was reportedly found standing upright, leaning against a wall as though deep in thought. A physician called to the scene confirmed death, though the cause remains undetermined. Scotland Yard has been informed." I frowned, standing. "That's rather odd." "Indeed," Holmes said with a faint smile. "Men may die suddenly, but seldom do they remain on their feet when doing so. The human body is not known for its balance in death." Just then, the bell rang downstairs, and Mrs. Hudson's voice floated up, announcing Inspector Lestrade. Holmes's smile widened. "And now the curtain rises." Lestrade entered a moment later, rubbing his hands against the cold and carrying a brown leather folder under his arm. His usual expression, a mixture of suspicion and determined professionalism, was set firmly in place. "Morning, Holmes." "Doctor," he said with a nod to me. "Lestrade," Holmes returned cordially. "You have come regarding the matter in Bloomsbury." Lestrade blinked in surprise. "You've heard?" "The Morning Post is hardly subtle," Holmes said, gesturing to the paper. "I assume there is more to it than a man with excellent posture passing away mid-shot." Lestrade grunted and took the armchair Holmes indicated. "It's a queer one, I'll admit. The deceased is Philip Darnley, wealthy, reclusive, something of a gentleman scholar. known more in certain political circles than public ones. Found dead in the billiard room of the St. Agatha Club at 6 this morning. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle. And well, you read the bit about him being found standing. Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Who discovered the body? One of the junior club stewards. Said he was preparing the room for the morning game. Found Darnley leaned upright against the wall near the cue rack, eyes open, face calm as a monk's. Curious, Holmes murmured. And what of the post-mortem? Not yet done. Club physician Dr. Carl Stone was first to examine him. Said rigor mortis hadn't yet set in, but he was quite dead. No signs of stroke or heart failure at first glance. What of the man's history? Enemies, health, habits? Lestrade flipped open the folder. No family to speak of, unmarried, maintained a modest estate outside London, but spent most of his time at the club. Rumor has it he was writing a book, something on antiquities or ancient justice. That sort of thing. Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. Ah, the dead do love their secrets. I'll need you to look over the scene, Lestrade said, tapping the folder. Frankly, Holmes, it's damned unnatural. The scene feels too untouched, like something's been scrubbed, though I can't say what. Excellent, Holmes said, rising and reaching for his coat. Come, Watson. The game is afoot, and it appears to be one of elegance. As we rode in Lestrade's cab toward Bloomsbury, Holmes said little. His eyes were half-lidded, but I could see his mind was sharply awake, grinding away like the gears of some magnificent and invisible machine. You think there's more to this than a natural death? I asked. I think, Holmes replied slowly, that a man who dies standing upright in a locked, silent room without a mark, wound, or screamed, did not die naturally. Nature lacks that sense of performance. He fell silent again, tapping his fingers against the windowsill as we rolled through the waking streets of London. Whatever lay ahead, I could sense we were descending into one of those peculiar riddles that only Holmes could untangle. A death as still as a statue, as quiet as a lie long kept. The St. Agatha Club awaited. So did the man who had died, standing up. Chapter 2. A Gentleman's Silence. The cab ride to Bloomsbury unfolded beneath a gray sky, with mist still curling along the edges of lampposts and slinking through alleys like a watchful spectre. Holmes sat beside me in pensive silence, fingertips pressed together, his eyes not on the street, but on some inward landscape visible only to him. Lestrade fidgeted with his gloves. The club's steward was quite shaken. The inspector said, "Claims Mr. Darnley was always punctual, always composed. A solitary man, to be sure, but not unpleasant. It was one of the young footmen who found him. Poor lad's hands were shaking so bad he dropped the ash bucket." "Was the club locked overnight?" Holmes asked without looking up. "It was. Only 5 staff have keys. The senior steward, 2 night porters, the steward's assistant, and the head of security. None of them noticed anything amiss during the night. No noise, no alarms." Holmes pressed. "Nothing," Lestrade admitted. "No signs of forced entry either. The room was locked from the inside. That's what makes this so infernally curious. The only entrance is a single door to the hall, and all the windows were latched." Holmes nodded faintly. "As I suspected, an enclosed stage. We arrived shortly after at the St. Agatha Club, a refined structure of Georgian brick and polished brass, its ivy-covered facade belying the turmoil within. A uniformed porter admitted us at once, clearly briefed to offer no resistance to the peculiar genius of Baker Street. Inside, the club exuded the sort of hush one finds in libraries and mausoleums, an uneasy stillness where even footsteps seemed intrusive. A handful of club members loitered in the lounge, murmuring in restrained tones behind newspapers and half-empty glasses. All conversation ceased as Holmes passed through. The steward, a thin man of about 50, with thinning hair and a pallor to match his white gloves, met us near the stairs. He introduced himself as Mr. Pelham and gestured toward the second floor. "The billiard room is just this way, Mr. Holmes, if you please." Lestrade and I followed as Holmes ascended with his characteristic, quick, noiseless step. The steward fumbled with a brass key at the end of a dark hall, his hands still trembling slightly. "I've been here 20 years, Pelham whispered. "I've seen gentlemen quarrel, drink to excess, even faint, but I've never ever seen a man dead on his feet." He pushed the door open. The room was dim, the morning light failing to cut through the drawn velvet curtains. A billiard table stood at the center, its green baize untouched. Polished cues lined the wall beside it, and to the far end, beneath a mounted oil painting of a fox hen, stood a low, oak-paneled alcove, and within it the very place where Philip Darnley had been discovered. Only now the body was gone. A white cloth lay folded over a nearby divan, and a faint trace of chalk dust marked the wooden floor where he had last stood. "I had the body moved only after Dr. Carlstone arrived," Pelham said quickly. "It did not seem decent to leave him there." "You did right." "Was anything disturbed?" "Nothing at all, sir. The steward's assistant found him at precisely 6:45. Mr. Darnley had requested the room for private use. The evening prior wanted to practice shots, he said. He was seen entering at 9 o'clock and never came out. The doors were locked all night. No visitors. None. Members are required to sign in for access after hours. The log shows only Darnley last night." Holmes drifted silently toward the alcove. He bent to examine the floor where the chalk had settled. His eyes darted from the scuff marks to the nearest cue stand, then to the gas lamp above. "Watson," he called, "do you note the alignment of this cue rack?" I joined him and peered closely. One of the cues, an elegant piece with ivory inlay, was slightly askew, its lower tip resting not quite within the groove. A faint smudge, dark and misshapen, clung to its shaft. "Blood," I whispered. Holmes shook his head. "Too dark, possibly ink or soot. But look here." He traced a line along the floor, leading from the cue rack to the wall. "There's a disturbance in the dust, a straight trail, almost imperceptible." Lestrade crouched beside him. "A stick dragged across the floor, or a thin object pulled from the wall," Holmes murmured. "And look to the molding, see this gap here." A portion of the decorative wall paneling, no more than a few inches across, had a seam barely visible in the dim light. Holmes retrieved a small blade from his pocket and, with a gentle prod, coaxed the panel to shift. It opened on a narrow cavity, empty. Lestrade leaned in. "A hiding place, perhaps, recently used," Holmes said. "No dust within, clean air. What's in your thoughts?" I hesitated. Could it have held something poisonous? A concealed device? Possibly. but not explosive, or we'd see signs of heat. And no scent suggests poison yet. Holmes replaced the panel carefully and stood. His gaze swept once more over the table, the painting, the floor, and then the far corner where an empty brandy glass sat beside a single armchair. He strode to it. Lifting the glass delicately, he inhaled its rim. No scent of liquor. Yet the glass is damp. Someone rinsed it, Lestrade offered. Perhaps, Holmes said, eyes narrowing. Or someone wanted it to appear unused. The room had begun to whisper now, as though secrets lingered in the panels and shadows. Holmes stood by the window and parted the curtain slightly, peering out at the inner courtyard. He turned to us at last. There's more here than meets the eye. A man does not die upright for no reason, and the man who leaves no trace upon death is often the one who left many before it. What's your next step? I asked. Holmes tilted his head. We find out who Philip Darnley truly was, not merely a man of books, but a man with a reason to die so neatly. Chapter 3. A Scene of Deception. It was not long after our initial examination of the billiard room that Holmes requested to remain behind while Lestrade and I accompanied the club's records. I could see from Holmes stands motionless at the alcove where the body had been discovered that some unseen line of thought was coiling itself into form. The steward led us to the administrative office on the ground floor. There, in a narrow ledger book, bound in worn red leather, we found the record of the previous evening. Here, said Pelham, pointing to the last page. Mr. Darnley signed in at 8:58 p.m., requesting private use of the billiard room. He had standing permission to do so. No one else entered the room afterward? I asked. Not according to the log. Lestrade scowled. And you're certain it couldn't be tampered with? Pelham bristled. Our porters are vigilant. Every door is locked after hours, and every entry recorded without exception. I was not quite as convinced. Something about the Sinnett's meticulous quiet, the untouched green felt, the polished cues felt to exact, not merely undisturbed, but purposefully so, as though someone had scrubbed the world clean of any trace. We returned to the billiard room to find Holmes kneeling once more beside the cue rack, his lens in hand. He looked up as we entered. There is something I wish to demonstrate, he said quietly. Lestrade, stand here, if you would. Just beside the cue stand. Watson moved to the alcove. Imagine, if you will, Mr. Darnley standing where you are now, and observe. I obeyed, stepping into the shaded recess. Holmes adjusted a nearby gas sconce, directing its glow downward toward the floorboards. Now look at the baseboard, Watson. What do you see? I peered carefully. A faint mark, perhaps smudged polish. Just here. Holmes smiled. Precisely. And now direct your gaze above it. I looked upward. A hook, I said. Barely noticeable. It blends with the paneling. A hook, Holmes echoed, installed at just the right height to catch a man's jacket collar. Observe, were a man to be led backward, gently, toward this wall, his coat arranged, his limbs braced, he could appear to be standing, unaided, briefly, long enough to be found. Lestrade stepped forward. You mean to say he was posed that way? Holmes stood. It is a theory. A man in the throes of death rarely arranges himself theatrically. The angle of the limbs, the stiffness of the posture, too deliberate. And this hook, he tapped it lightly, bears a recent scratch, as though something metallic pressed against it, possibly a button or cufflink. Lestrade narrowed his eyes. Then the question is no longer just how Darnley died. Peculiar. Indeed, Holmes murmured. He walked to the brandy glass once more, now dried entirely. There is also the matter of this glass. Pelham, did Mr. Darnley have any known vices? Drink, tobacco? Neither, Mr. Holmes. He was exceptionally temperate. Never drank more than a sherry at supper. We keep his preferred brandy locked in the sideboard here, but it's rarely touched. Holmes nodded. And yet the glass was wet this morning. Lestrade turned. Could he have taken some last night, despite his habits? Possible, Holmes said. But let us consider alternatives. Suppose someone wanted it to seem as though he had poured a drink. Suppose they wished to imply a private moment, a solitary evening of contemplation. Lestrade scratched his jaw. You're suggesting a staged scene. I suggest nothing yet, Holmes said. But we are surrounded by signs too tidy to be coincidence. A man found standing. A hidden hook. A rinsed glass. No trace of poison or struggle. Either Mr. Darnley died in peace, having arranged his own death with uncommon tidiness, or someone took great care to tidy it for him. Watson spoke up. And what of the hollow in the wall? You said it had been used recently. Holmes' eyes glinted. Ah, yes. The recess behind the panel. Whatever was once inside is now gone, but its absence speaks. Why install such a hiding place unless you had something to hide? I intend to learn what that object was. There was a knock at the door, and a young porter entered, hat in hand. Beg pardon, sirs. Dr. Carlstone said you'd asked to examine Mr. Darnley's belongings. Indeed, Holmes replied. We've brought them to the reading room. Just his coat, hat, and briefcase. He'd left the rest upstairs in his private locker. Moments later, we stood in the reading room, where the effects lay on a polished table. Holmes approached the coat first, a fine wool overcoat of excellent make. He turned it over, inspected the lapels, the lining, and finally the inner pocket. He removed a folded envelope. No name, Holmes said, opening it. Inside was a single page of thick cream paper. He read it silently. Well? Lestrade asked. Holmes passed it to me. The handwriting was delicate, almost painfully careful. For all things I buried, I offer no penance. The hour is late, and I fear only silence. Let the past sleep. There was no signature. A suicide note, Lestrade offered. Holmes shook his head. No, a message, perhaps, but not one composed by a man in despair. There is intention in its restraint, an author seeking to veil meaning rather than confess it. Watson glanced at the briefcase. And that? Holmes opened it gently. Inside were two items, a leather-bound notebook and a small cloth-wrapped bundle. The latter, when unrolled, revealed a curious objecta bronze medallion, tarnished with age, bearing a strange crest of concentric circles and a serpent devouring its own tail. Holmes held it to the light. Ancient, possibly Egyptian, or a modern imitation. I shall consult a reference. What about the notebook? I asked. Holmes flipped it open. Its pages were dense with careful inked notes, sketches, fragments of Latin and Greek. He stopped at one page and raised a brow at its center. Drawn in pencil was the same symbol as the medallion, curled into eternity. Holmes closed the book. Gentlemen, he said softly. We are dealing with more than a death. This is a puzzle with its roots in the ancient, the symbolic and, perhaps, the secret. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Suspects. Symbol remained in my mind long after we had left the reading room, a serpent eating its own tail, drawn both in the notebook and carved into the medallion, as though it were a cipher for something older than the crime itself. Holmes, for his part, carried the object carefully in his gloved hand as we followed Lestrade and the steward to the upstairs parlor. The club's senior members, those who had either interacted with Darnley the night before or had known him more than in passing, had agreed to speak with us. It was a rich, wood-paneled room furnished with armchairs in dark leather, walls lined with portraits, and an ornate clock that ticked with the peculiar authority of old English machinery. 4 individuals awaited us, each seated with the wary stiffness of people who know a shadow has passed over their circle, but cannot agree from which direction it came. Holmes surveyed the room briefly, then took a chair with a measured air of calm. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, he began. You are, I presume, aware of why we've asked to speak with you. The death of Mr. Darnley is not, in my view, as simple as it appears. I ask only for candor. Lies, omissions, and performances benefit no one. There was a moment of tense silence. Then the eldest among them, a man with heavy silver eyebrows and a signet ring the size of a coin, spoke first. I am Sir Lawrence Trevelyan, he said. I knew Philip from our university days. We were not close, but cordial. He had eccentric habits. Eccentric in what way? Holmes asked. Private to the point of obsession, Sir Lawrence said. He would vanish for days without explanation. He once returned from Morocco with a crate of bones and scrolls, speaking of tombs and rites that I found quite indecipherable. Next spoke a woman tall, dressed in deep burgundy, with a lace collar fastened by a ruby brooch. Her voice was crisp and composed. I am Mrs. Evangeline Broom. I know what you're thinking. It's unusual for a woman to be admitted to a club like this, but I am a historian and sponsor of antiquarian societies. Mr. Darnley and I exchanged notes frequently. We were working on a paper concerning ancient initiation rites. Holmes's interest visibly sharpened. Then you may be able to shed light on this, he said, producing the medallion. He handed it to her. Mrs. Broom held it with a reverence I had not expected. The Ouroboros, she said softly, a symbol of eternity, rebirth, destruction folded into creation. It is one of the oldest metaphors in recorded thought. You've seen it before. In Mr. Darnley's notes, yes, she said. He believed a forgotten sect in Alexandria used this symbol in private rituals involving silence and burial. He was obsessed with the idea of living death. A third voice interrupted, an irritable rasp belonging to a man of stout build and bushy whiskers. Nonsense and fantasy. All of it. And you are, sir? Holmes asked. Brandwell Catesby, he said, treasurer of the club, and, for my sins, executor of Mr. Darnley's estate. If he had won, I warned him often this obsession with mystery would be his undoing. You disapproved of his interests. I found them juvenile, superstition draped in academic robes. Darnley surrounded himself with fog and mirrors, always scribbling about shadows and ancient voices. But when it came to Peepereel was blind. Meaning, I asked. He distrusted everyone, Catesby said. Never dined with the club. Avoided conversation. Yet he would leave notes in the library, cryptic riddles, Greek maxims. He thought himself a sphinx. Holmes nodded thoughtfully and turned to the last of the four, a young man with pale eyes, a slight stammer, and a hesitant posture. I'm Henry Wick, he said. I'm an assistant librarian here. I helped Mr. Darnley organize his research, at least. When he let me. Did you see him yesterday? Holmes asked gently. Wick nodded. Yes, he asked me to retrieve 3 books from the archive 2 were on Mesopotamian rites, and the third was a collection of funeral inscriptions. He seemed unusually focused. He barely spoke, just kept mumbling to himself and jotting in that little red notebook. Did he mention what he was working on? He said he'd found the last piece. That was his phrase. The last piece, and then he asked to be left alone. Holmes leaned back, and no one else interacted with him. Mrs. Broom hesitated. He sent me a letter the previous day, a single line. The tomb opens only when the door is sealed. I assumed it was metaphorical. Sir Lawrence scoffed. With Darnley, nothing was ever metaphorical. He lived in riddles. Holmes turned to Lestrade. We must examine Darnley's personal locker. Now, I suspect the most important clues are the ones no longer in plain sight. Before we could depart, Catesby stood. I'll accompany you. I have the key. As we walked down the corridor toward the private locker rooms, Holmes said quietly to me, Observe them, Watson. Each one spoke as though they knew him best, but all, in different ways, feared him. Not as a threat, but as a mirror reflecting something unsettling. You think they're hiding something? I asked. Not necessarily facts, Holmes said, but sentiment. And sentiment, when concealed, is the surest foundation for deception. We reached a small wooden door labeled Private Effects. Catesby unlocked it with a short brass key, revealing a narrow room with a row of lockers. He gestured to the third from the left. Holmes stepped forward and opened it. Inside were a number of mundane items: an umbrella, a walking stick, a clean shirt, and a lacquered wooden box sealed with a latch. He lifted the box carefully and opened it. Within lay several documents, a faded daguerreotype of a young woman in a locket, and a sealed envelope marked to be opened upon my death. Lestrade drew a breath. Well, that's direct enough. Holmes did not open the letter at once. He examined it closely, then held it to the light. The paper, he murmured, was folded recently. Ink is dry, but the crease is sharp. He prepared this within the last 48 hours. He tucked the letter carefully into his pocket. We'll read it shortly, but I advise cautions. Such notes are as often misleading as they are enlightening. Do you think he knew he was going to die? I asked. I think, Holmes said, that Darnley expected to vanish. Sean wanted to control how the world found him. Chapter 5. First Suspects. The red herring word count. Approximately 1,060 by midday. The clouds over Bloomsbury had begun to thicken, casting the St. Agatha Club into a dull, smoky light. Inside the reading room, Lestrade hovered anxiously by the hearth while Holmes, seated with perfect calm at the central table, carefully slit open the envelope marked to be opened upon my death. I stood nearby, notebook in hand, unsure whether I was witnessing a confession, a clue, or a final misdirection. The paper within was stiff, folded, thrice, and lined with the same meticulous handwriting we had seen before. To whom it may concern, if I am found lifeless, know this: I was not taken by force, nor by fear. The matter lies buried, as it should remain. The key is lost, and so is the lock. Let the serpent coil in silence. P.D. Lestrade exhaled sharply. Well, that's no use. It's poetry again, like the rest of his papers. Holmes said nothing at first. He reread the note twice, then folded it with slow precision and returned it to the envelope. On the contrary, he murmured, it confirms a theory. Darnley anticipated death, though not necessarily by his own hand. He speaks of something being buried figuratively. I believe on someone who may come looking for it. Lestrade paced. Let's be plain, Holmes. Do you believe this was suicide or not? I believe, Holmes said, that Mr. Darnley arranged the illusion of isolation to disguise a meeting, and that meeting cost him his life. Lestrade straightened. Then we have a suspect. Holmes nodded. Perhaps more than one. But for now, let us examine the most convenient one. We returned to the parlor, where Henry Wick, the young assistant librarian, still waited with a nervous expression. He rose as we entered. Mr. Holmes, he said, have you discovered something? That depends, Holmes said mildly. Henry, when you last spoke with Mr. Darnley, did he mention anyone living or dead who had cause to oppose his work? Wick hesitated. He mentioned someone, a rival scholar, but only in passing. Name, Dr. August Lemming. He teaches at Cambridge. They'd corresponded for years, but Darnley accused him recently of intellectual theft. Something about a paper being published without credit. Lestrade snorted. An academic quarrel, hardly murder. On the contrary, Holmes said, such rivalries have often inspired worse. Pride, when wounded, sharpens like a blade. But Lemming wasn't even here, Lestrade argued. We've no evidence he came to London. Holmes turned to Henry. Did Mr. Darnley ever receive visitors privately? Letters, packages? Wick nodded slowly. Yes. 2 days ago, a parcel arrived. It was heavy wrapped in canvas and sealed with wax. He said it was from an old correspondent. He didn't say who. Holmes' eyes narrowed. And what became of this parcel? I don't know. He took it to the billiard room that evening. Lestrade looked at Holmes, then at me. That room's been swept top to bottom. There's no parcel there now. Holmes was already rising. Then we must ask ourselves, who could have removed it? Who had access to the room after Darnley died, but before the body was discovered? Only the staff, Lestrade muttered. The steward, the porters, maybe the club physician. Holmes said nothing. He crossed to the door and called down the corridor, requesting Mr. Pelham once again. The steward arrived promptly, pale and watchful as ever. Mr. Pelham, Holmes said, I must ask, were you alone when you moved Mr. Darnley's body? No, sir, Pelham replied. I was with Dr. Carlstone. And did you or the doctor remove anything from the scene? Certainly not. Holmes studied him for a long moment. You've known Dr. Carlstone long. 10 years. He's attended to half the members here. Holmes gave a slow nod. Have him meet us in the billiard room. Minutes later, Dr. Carlstone arrived, his usual calm demeanor now laced with a hint of impatience. Is this strictly necessary? He asked. Holmes gestured toward the alcove. You helped move the body from that precise location. In doing so, you may have disturbed or overlooked something. We must be certain." Carl Stone stepped forward. "We disturbed nothing, Mr. Holmes. There was nothing to disturb." Holmes moved to the edge of the billiard table. "And yet a large parcel canvas wrapped and heavy was brought into this room the night before last. Mr. Darnley was seen carrying it. It has now vanished." Carl Stone's face twitched. "I saw no such thing." Holmes nodded, almost as if expecting that answer. "You didn't, because it was already gone." He turned to Lestrade. "Consider this. Darnley enters the room around 9. He locks the door behind him. No one else is seen entering. He is later found dead, standing. No signs of struggle. No wounds, no poison, and no parcel." "So it was taken before he was found," I said. "Precisely," Holmes agreed. "But that raises the question," Lestrade muttered, "unless the killer had a key." Holmes smiled faintly. "Or unless the killer was already in the room." A stunned silence followed. Lestrade stepped forward. "You think someone was waiting for him?" "It would explain much," Holmes said. "Why the door was locked from the inside. Why Darnley made no outcry. Why the body was positioned so precisely. Why the parcel vanished without a trace." Carl Stone folded his arms. "This is speculation, Mr. Holmes." Holmes turned to him sharply. "Is it? Then tell me, Dr. Ware, were you last night at 9 o'clock? Carl Stone blinked. "Was at home, reading, alone." "Yes." Holmes offered a nod that could not be called agreement. "Thank you." Lestrade pulled him aside. "You suspect Carl's—" "He has motive and access," Holmes said. "And now, no alibi. But it is too easy, too soon. Darnley may have accused a rival, feared a secret, and even staged part of his own death. But none of that tells us who stood across from him in this room. Then who do you believe it was?" Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Not yet a name. But I believe the true culprit left something behind unseen, unconsidered." He turned toward the wall panel he had previously opened and tapped it lightly. "Because this," he said, "was not just a hiding place. It was a message, and we've not yet learned to read it." Chapter 6. The Secret Clue. A Hidden Inconsistency. That evening, long after the sun had vanished behind the London rooftops, Holmes sat in his armchair at Baker Street, the fire casting flickering patterns across his sharp features. He had not spoken in nearly an hour, but his fingers danced idly across the arms of the chair, drumming in complex rhythms. His eyes were half-lidded, suggesting rest to a casual observer. But I had long since learned this was when his mind moved fastest. I, meanwhile, sat opposite the medallion resting on the table beside me, along with Darnley's sealed note, the strange envelope he'd left, and his notebook, which Holmes had insisted we bring with us from the club. "Holmes," I said finally, "do you believe the missing parcel is the key to the murder?" He opened his eyes slowly. "Perhaps, but I find myself more troubled by something smaller, something out of place." He rose and moved to the table, lifting Darnley's notebook again. With great care, he turned the pages to the sketch of the Serpentha Ouroboros. "You recall, Mrs. Broom," said Darnley, "believed in living death, yes?" "Yes," I nodded. "Some symbolic or spiritual concept, no doubt. A metaphor, or," Holmes said, tapping the page, "a dangerous obsession. Now look here on the reverse." He flipped the page to reveal a faint pencil impression, almost erased, of a hand-drawn map. It was no more than a few lines and a curve, but Holmes had traced it with graphite to restore clarity. "A map?" I asked. "A floor plan, more likely," Holmes replied. "And I believe it is the billiard room. This curve here the alcove. These lines, the window wall. But notice this." He pointed to a tiny mark at one corner. An X, not near the hiding place we found, but beneath the window ledge. My brow furrowed. "We didn't inspect the ledge closely." "No," Holmes said, "because it seemed unremarkable. But Darnley marked it for a reason." Within the hour, we had returned to the club under the pretext of a final inspection. Lestrade, though wearied by the day's efforts, was still present and begrudgingly allowed our re-entry. "You'd think we'd uncovered every inch of this room," he grumbled as Holmes strode directly to the curtained window. Holmes offered no reply. He pulled back the curtain, exposing the tall sash window and its paneled wooden seat. He ran his hand along the molding, pressing gently. "There," he said softly. "Feel that." I joined him and pressed along the corner. One of the wooden segments gave way beneath my fingers with a click. Holmes retrieved his blade and pried it open. Inside the hollow cavity was a small envelope, yellowed at the corners and sealed with a curious wax symbol, the Ouroboros. Again, Holmes broke it carefully and withdrew a folded note. He read it in silence, then passed it to me. "To he who follows, I fear I have awakened an old truth. Not buried, merely watching. It was never mine to possess, and I am no longer its keeper. The burden must end. If I vanish, do not search. Let it return to dust." Below it, a single set of initials, E.B. Evangeline Broom, I whispered. "But why hide it in his room?" Lestrade was peering over my shoulder. "Are you saying she left this here before he died?" Holmes closed the panel. "No, I suspect he hid it himself. Evidence he meant for someone to find, but not immediately. Darnley feared something, or someone, and he believed Miss Broom was involved, or perhaps in danger." "But the note doesn't accuse her," I said. "No," Holmes agreed. "It's more like a warning, a passing of the torch." Lestrade folded his arms. "So now she's a suspect." Holmes turned away from the window and returned to the center of the room. "No one is ruled out, but consider this. Darnley receives a parcel from an unnamed correspondent, possibly this Dr. Lemingon, the eve of his death. He makes cryptic remarks about the last piece and buries references to a forgotten sect, symbolic death, and silent watchers. Then he dies standing, posed, without struggle, in a locked room. A medallion vanishes. A hiding place is found empty. And yet a second hiding place in Mart, unexpected, contains a message implicating a fellow scholar, or perhaps protecting her." "Layers upon layers," I murmured. "Exactly," Holmes said. "A man who fears being watched does not sit still. He encodes, he layers, and he conceals. Which means everything we've uncovered is only part of a larger pattern." Lestrade was pacing now. "But what do we do with this?" "Bring in Miss Broom for questioning." "Not yet," Holmes said. "If she is innocent, we risk driving her underground. If she is guilty, we risk spooking her. No, I propose something else. We invite her to Baker Street." Lestrade looked alarmed. "What, to talk?" Holmes said simply, without pressure. A woman like Broom, intellectual, composed and self-guarded, will not reveal herself under formal interrogation. But in the right setting, perhaps she'll tell us what Darnley feared. We left the club shortly after, but Holmes stopped just before exiting. He looked once more at the billiard table, then at the far wall where the cue rack stood. "What is it?" I asked. "An inconsistency," he said. "Darnley had no game scheduled. He requested the room privately. He was found near the cue rack, yet the table was untouched. You believe he never intended to play?" "I believe he brought something with him. Perhaps the missing porcelain staged the scene to appear casual. A glass, a cue, a locked door. But there's something wrong about that cue." He returned to it, kneeling. He adjusted one of the cues and then pulled it free. "This one," he said. "It doesn't belong." I stepped closer. It looked identical to the other's ivory, inlaid, polished dark wood, but now that Holmes had separated it, I saw the difference. The base was slightly broader. The weight was wrong. Holmes gave it a twist and, with a faint pop, the lower half unscrewed to reveal a hollow core. Inside was a narrow roll of parchment. He unrolled it carefully. It was a drawing, intricate, circular, symbolic. A serpent once again, but this time surrounded by sigils and text I did not recognize, Latin, Greek, and something far older. Holmes gave a satisfied nod. "Now," he said, "we are finally closing in on the truth." Chapter 7. The crime grows stranger. The discovery of the concealed parchment inside the hollowed billiard cue marked a shift in Holmes's demeanor. Where before he had been patient and deliberate, now there was urgency in his step. A flicker of fire beneath the usual veil of detached calm back at Baker Street. He laid the scroll upon a broad sheet of butcher's paper and began transcribing its contents by lamplight. I stood beside him, squinting at the faded ink, the loops of archaic lettering, and symbols that resembled stars, daggers, and serpents coiled within circles. "It's not merely a drawing," Holmes said. "It's a schema, a ritual of sorts, though the meaning is intentionally obscured." "A ritual?" I asked, unsettled. "Indeed," Holmes replied. "Look here, Latin inscriptions around the outer ring. Silentium post transitum, silence after passage. And this Greek line, eminem kai, lth, memory and forgetting. The diagram suggests stages, perhaps steps in a rite." Darnley believed this ancient order, whatever it was, survived beyond history, buried in codes, language, and geometry. "But why conceal it in a billiard cue?" I asked. "And why hide the cue, among others, where anyone might find it?" "Because," Holmes said, "he trusted no one. The cue was a false staff-a-wand, if you will, hidden in plain sight, just as he likely intended. It was never meant to be discovered until after his death." Lestrade, who had returned with us and now stood by the fire, frowned. "So what? He dies with a secret buried inside a stick, leaves vague notes and creepy drawings, and we still don't know who killed him." Holmes looked up. "No, but we now know why he might have been worth killing." That moment was interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a calling card. Holmes took it, read it, and passed it to me. "Mrs. Evangeline Broom, Society for Antiquarian Preservation. She's here?" I asked, surprised. "She is," Mrs. Hudson said, "and she insists it's urgent." Holmes nodded. Show her in." Moments later, Evangeline Broom swept into the room, her face pale beneath a black feathered hat. There was no sign of her earlier composure. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes were rimmed with fatigue. "I cannot keep silent any longer," she said without preamble. "I've received a message, one I do not understand, but it frightens me deeply." She withdrew an envelope from her handbag and handed it to Holmes. He opened it. Inside was a single cardinal words, only an image, drawn in black ink, the Ouroboros, entwined with a dagger that pierced its own tail. "No signature," she said. "No address. It arrived at my flat this morning." Holmes examined the paper. The ink is recent. Thick, matte commercial brushwork, not a fountain pen. Likely drawn deliberately to mimic ancient inscriptions. "A message of threat, but why me?" she asked. "I've done nothing." "On the contrary," Holmes said. "You and Mr. Darnley were close collaborators. His death may have been only the beginning." Lestrade stepped forward. "Mrs. Broom, where were you the night of Mr. Darnley's death?" "In my flat, Inspector," she replied. "Alone, reading and preparing notes for the Society's quarterly journal." "No witnesses?" he asked. She shook her head. "None. I live alone." Holmes regarded her with narrowed eyes, not accusing, but assessing. "Did Darnley ever speak of a discovery he feared?" he asked. "Something ancient, dangerous, perhaps?" She hesitated. "Yes," she said finally. "He had been researching a manuscript, one believed to have vanished in the fire at the Library of Alexandria. He claimed he'd found references to it in obscure church records in southern Italy. He believed it described a rite of memory, the deliberate forgetting of truths that, once known, could not be born." "So?" I asked, puzzled. "Possibly," she said. But Philip was vague. "He mentioned layers of silence and truths buried beneath consent." "I thought it metaphorical," Holmes interjected. "Did he ever mention Dr. August Lemming?" That name caused her to blink. "Yes," he said. "Lemming had once been a friend and, then, a rival. He accused him of theft. Intellectual theft. Would Lemming harm him?" Lestrade asked bluntly. "I couldn't say," she replied. "But I know they had a falling out after Darnley submitted a proposal to the Society 2 years ago. Lemming published something eerily similar weeks later." Holmes had been silent for a time, studying the serpentine dagger drawing. "Watson," he said quietly, "have you ever heard of a symbol that denies itself?" I blinked. "I'm not sure I follow." "Consider this," he continued, holding the card aloft. "The Ouroboros consumes itself, symbol of renewal and oblivion. The dagger interrupts it, destroying the cycle. This is not simply a threat. It is a declaration. Your secrets are no longer protected." Evangeline sat forward, voice taut. "Then what should I do?" Holmes folded the card and returned it to her. "You must remain under watch. For your safety, you'll stay elsewhere, tonight, someplace secure and known only to us." Lestrade nodded. "I can arrange that." Holmes's gaze returned to the parchment. "This ritual, whatever it was, has not been practiced in centuries, if ever. But the symbols persist. Someone killed Darnley, not to obtain knowledge, but to silence it." He stood suddenly. "Watson, we're going to Cambridge, to visit Dr. August Lemming. If he is the next link in this chain, we must see what he knows and what he fears." Lestrade's eyes narrowed. "You're expecting him to run." Holmes smiled faintly. "I'm expecting him to lie. and I intend to find out why. Chapter 8. Holmes tests a theory. By dawn the following morning, we were aboard the earliest express to Cambridge. Holmes had scarcely slept, though he appeared no worse for it. He sat beside me in the compartment, coat collar turned up, hands gloved, and his gaze fixed not on the rolling landscape, but on the deeper terrain of thought that occupied his mind. "You are unusually quiet," I ventured. Unable to bear the silence. "I am," Holmes replied, "because I am building a trap." He turned to me and tapped the notebook still nestled in his coat. The parchment concealed in the queue, the hidden letter from Evangeline Broome, the staged nature of the death-all suggest that this crime is more performance than impulse. A carefully arranged masquerade. And the one thread common to all these illusions is August Lemming. "But we've no proof he was even in London," I reminded him. "Precisely," Holmes said. "That is what I intend to provide." We arrived at Cambridge just after 10 o'clock. The town was steeped in its usual scholarly quiet. Students in gowns passing under ancient stone archways, their heads full of Latin and logic. At Holmes's instruction, we proceeded not directly to the university, but to the town post office. There he presented a calling card bearing Lemming's name, hastily forged in Holmes's own hand. "A parcel," Holmes said to the clerk, "awaiting Dr. August Lemming. Sent under special instruction yesterday afternoon." The clerk, a bespectacled youth, frowned and thumbed through the ledger. "No parcel, sir. But there was a telegram addressed to Dr. Lemming, sent from London yesterday evening. Unusual one, tout blanc, save for the words, 'The coil is broken.' No sender's name." Holmes's eyes lit briefly. "And did Dr. Lemming collect it?" "This morning, just before 9. "Excellent," Holmes said. "Thank you." As we stepped back into the street, I said, "That proves he's in Cambridge." "No," Holmes corrected. "It proves he was here at 9. It tells us nothing of where he was the night Darnley died." We made our way to the Faculty of Antiquities, where we were shown to a small but well-appointed office on the second floor. Inside, seated at a desk strewn with books and drafts, was a thin man with close-cropped gray hair and an expression at once austere and cautious. He rose as we entered. "Dr. Lemming," Holmes said warmly, offering his hand. "I'm Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson. I believe you're familiar with the late Philip Darnley." Lemming froze for the briefest moment, then extended his hand with effort. "Yes, of course. A tragic loss." "You must have heard the news," Holmes said, taking a seat uninvited. "I received word this morning," Lemming replied, gesturing vaguely toward the telegram on his desk. "Though I admit the phrasing was rather cryptic." Holmes smiled. "Cryptic messages seem to follow you and Mr. Darnley both. Tell me, Doctor, when did you last see him?" Lemming looked away. "Several months ago, we had a disagreement. He accused me of misappropriating his research for an article I submitted to the Antiquities Review. I denied it, of course, but the damage to our friendship was done." "And yet you sent him a parcel 2 nights ago?" Holmes asked casually. Lemming blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "A canvas-wrapped parcel, wax-sealed," Holmes said, watching him closely. "Heavy, delivered to the St. Agatha Club." "I did no such thing," Lemming said, his voice sharp. "Why would I? To share knowledge, perhaps. Or to settle old debts." Or Holmes leaned forward, "to return something he should never have possessed." Lemming flushed. Mr. Holmes, I haven't left Cambridge in over a week. I have lectures, correspondence, responsibilities. Ah, Holmes said. Then you'll have no objection to providing an affidavit and time log for the evening of October 14th. The man's mouth opened slightly, then closed. I was here, alone, preparing next term's syllabi. No visitors. No. Holmes stood. Then perhaps you'll allow us to examine your recent post sent and received? Lemming stiffened. Is that necessary? Only if you're telling the truth, Holmes replied. There was a long pause. Finally, Lemming exhaled and moved to a cabinet. From it, he produced a slim folder and handed it over. Inside were receipts for several letters, a parcel sent to Athens, and curiously one parcel dispatched to London, dated 2 days prior. Holmes tapped the line. This, doctor. What was it? A book, Lemming muttered. An old volume Darnley once lent me. I returned it as a gesture of reconciliation, and you did not think it relevant when I mentioned the parcel. I didn't connect it. Holmes said nothing more. He closed the folder and handed it back. You've been very helpful, he said smoothly. Good day, doctor. We stepped outside into the courtyard, the stones wet from an earlier drizzle. He's lying, I said. Of course, Holmes replied. The moment I mentioned the parcel, his pulse visibly jumped. And did you notice the telegram? He received it hours before our visit. It acted surprised to hear of Darnley's death. But why lie? Why return the book at all? Because, Holmes said, it was not a book. It was a warning or a key. Lemming sent something Darnley had once stolen, and someone killed to get it back. Holmes hailed a cab, and we began the return to the station. We are now nearing the center, he said. Each lie exposes another. And now, we must see how Mrs. Broom reacts to this particular thread. Do you think she's involved? I think, Holmes said carefully, that Darnley loved symbols more than people, but he trusted her. And trust, when broken, leaves the sharpest wound. He turned to the window, face reflected against the smudged glass. The serpent has eaten much, Watson, he said. But I wonder if even it knows what lies in its own tail. Chapter 9. A second attempt. The culprit strikes again. We returned to London beneath a brooding afternoon sky, thick with the low threat of rain. Holmes said little during the journey, his gaze turned outward. But I knew from long experience that his silence was not idle. It was the silence of threads being drawn taut, of unseen lines being tested. Upon arriving at Baker Street, we found Lestrade already waiting in the sitting room. His expression was darker than usual, his bowler hat still in hand. We've had a development, he said, without preamble. One I believe you'll find significant. Holmes motioned to the hearth. Sit, begin. Lestrade dropped into the armchair with a sigh and opened the small folder he'd brought with him. Early this morning, before you returned from Cambridge, a fire broke out in Miss Broom's lodgings. Holmes straightened. Was she harmed? No, thankfully. She was not there at the time, having spent the night at the safe house I arranged in Clerkenwell, as you requested. But the flat is ruined. The fire appears to have started in the study. I felt a chill. Deliberate. Lestrade nodded grimly. No doubt about it. Accelerants were found. Window forced from the rear. Whoever it was, they were searching for something, and, when they didn't find it, they torched the place. Holmes stood and paced toward the window. hands behind his back. And the neighbors, witnesses, none saw the intruder, though one claimed to hear the sound of breaking glass around 3 in the morning. Too late by the time the fire brigade arrived. Holmes turned. Then we are no longer dealing with a concealed motive. We are dealing with someone desperate. Cornered. Lestrade nodded. It gets worse. While the fire was being put out, a constable on scene noticed a symbol scorched into the floorboards of the study. He handed Holmes a charcoal rubbing taken from the scene. It was crude but unmistakable. The serpent devouring its own tail. The same symbol again, I murmured. Only now, Holmes said, examining it closely, less ceremonial, more like a mark of territory. This was no longer a warning. It was a signature. Lestrade leaned forward. Do you still think the killers after the missing parchment? I no longer believe it's just the parchment. There's something larger, an idea, a legacy perhaps. Darnley didn't just unearth a symbol, he uncovered something someone considers sacred, and Miss Broom may be the last link to it. Lestrade frowned. What about Lemming? Think he's behind the fire? Holmes shook his head. No, Lemming is weak, vain, secretive, but he's not the sort to climb through windows and set fires at 3 in the morning. No, this was done by someone else. Someone who either believes Broom knows more than she's admitted or simply wants to erase her connection entirely. I asked, should we move her again? Holmes considered it. No, that would signal fear. Let them think we've grown careless. Let them believe the game is nearing its end. Lestrade gave him a wary look. You're setting bait. Holmes offered a faint smile. As always, that evening we returned to the Clockenwell residence, where Miss Broom was staying. She greeted us with calm dignity, but I noted a new tightness around her eyes. Holmes did not waste time. You've been targeted, he said. Your flat was deliberately set ablaze. Do you know why? She lowered herself into a chair. No, unless, she trailed off. Unless what? Holmes prompted. There was something Philip once entrusted to me, she said slowly. A fragment of vellum mold, brittle, covered in strange writing. He called it a key, but never explained further. He took it back 2 weeks ago. Said he'd finally assembled the rest. Holmes's brow furrowed. And you never asked what it led to. I did, she replied. But he said it was safer not to know. He said truth is a blade that forgets the hand which wields it. A curious phrase, Holmes said. A terrifying one, she corrected. Holmes turned to me. Watson, we must return to the club tonight. Quietly, I asked. You think the missing object is still there? I think the killer believes something is, he said, and I intend to be there when they come for it. That night, long after midnight, we slipped into the St. Agatha Club through a service entrance. Holmes had arranged with Pelham for discreet access. The staff had been dismissed. The building locked. We took our positions. Holmes crouched in the alcove where Darnley had once stood. I behind the velvet curtains, pistol holstered beneath my coat. The billiard room was cloaked in shadows. The faint gleam of the green felt barely visible in the darkness. Minutes passed. Then an hour, and then a faint click. A window creaked open. A figure slid through the shadows with remarkable grace, landing noiselessly on the carpet. Even in the dark, Holmes moved with startling precision. He stepped from the alcove and lit a lantern, flooding the room with pale light. The figure froze. It was not a man, as we had assumed, but a woman, cloaked and gloved, with auburn curls tumbling from beneath her hood. Holmes's voice was low. "You've returned, Miss Broom." She did not move. "How did you? You never gave back the vellum, did you?" he said quietly. "You let Darnley think you had. But you kept a fragment, and when you saw the fire, you realized whoever was behind it would return to search the original hiding place." Her eyes flicked toward the cue rack, then to the alcove. "Don't," Holmes said. "It's gone. I removed everything hours ago." She stepped back. "You don't understand." He was right. About the ritual. About forgetting. "Then help us understand," Holmes said. But she turned suddenly, bolting for the open window. Holmes surged forward, but not in time. She vanished into the night, her cloak a shadow among shadows. I reached the window in time to see her dart into the alley and disappear. "She's not the killer," Holmes murmured. "But she's no longer a bystander. She knows what Darnley uncovered, Don. She fears it more than she fears us." I turned to him. "Then what now?" Holmes stepped back from the window and extinguished the lantern. "Now," he said, "we let her run and see who follows." Chapter 10. The true motive begins to surface. Chapter 11. The bait. Holmes. Grand strategy, word count, approximately 1078. Stillness followed Pelham's confession, not the absence of sound, but a peculiar quiet, charged with the weight of something long buried being dragged into the light. Holmes stood motionless for a beat, eyes fixed not on the steward, but on some deeper structure unfolding within his mind. Pelham lowered his gaze. "I should have spoken sooner. But when I saw what happened to Darnley, when I heard of the fire, the medallion, I feared the past had returned." Holmes's voice was quiet. "Then tell us everything. What did Darnley uncover?" Pelham nodded slowly, as if giving himself permission to remember. "It was nearly 20 years ago," he began. "We were students at Magdalen College, both immersed in ancient languages. Darnley became fixated on a footnote in an obscure Latin commentary reference to a forgotten sect known as the Circle of Ash. They believed in the deliberate erasure of memory as a sacrament, so powerful it had to be forgotten to survive." He paused. "At first, it was academic curiosity. But then he found a fragment, what he called the Rutin, a Benedictine archive in Umbria. That changed him." "In what way?" I asked. "He stopped speaking of knowledge," Pelham said. "He began speaking of initiation, of secrets that could reorder the mind. He claimed he'd uncovered a ritual one that allowed a man to forget not only facts, but identity, history, even morality," he said. "Forgetting was the only path to truth. I left the research soon after. I saw where it was leading," Holmes murmured. "And yet, years later, Darnley followed the trail again." Pelham nodded. "He believed the fragments scattered, incomplete, could be reconstructed, that once reassembled, they would unlock what had once been sealed by design." Lestrade leaned forward. "Sealed by whom, exactly?" Pelham looked up. "By those who feared what it revealed." Holmes turned to the hearth. "Then Darnley's murder was not to silence him. It was to stop something. A ceremony, perhaps. A conclusion." "Yes," Pelham said. "And I believe he knew it." There was a long pause. Then Holmes turned abruptly. "Gentlemen, I believe it is time we force a hand." Lestrade frowned. "What do you mean?" Holmes paced to the window. "The killer has made one mistake visible. They left a mark in the burned study. They left the medallion with Lemming. They want us to know we're being watched, that arrogance can be used. I understood at once. You intend to draw them out. Precisely, Holmes said, but not with suspicion. With opportunity. He turned to Pelham. You say Darnley believed the scrolls could be reassembled. Then let's give our killer reason to believe they already have been. That evening, Holmes's plan took shape with precision. A carefully crafted letter, bearing Miss Broom's handwriting recreated by Holmes, with startling accuracy, was dispatched to the Society for Antiquarian Preservation. It announced that a final symposium would be held the next evening in the reading hall of the St. Agatha Club. The topic, the root and the restoration of ritual memory. Invitations were quietly extended to key figures. Lemming, released from observation earlier that afternoon, Mrs. Broom, whose location was still known only to Lestrade, and several minor antiquarian scholars. But the true audience was unseen. Holmes addressed this directly. We will make it known. He told Lestrade that the complete scroll reassembled and translated will be revealed at this gathering. That will be enough. Lestrade rubbed his chin. You think the killer will try to stop it? No, Holmes replied. I think they'll try to complete it. That night, the club was quietly prepared. Rooms swept, staff dismissed. Lestrade stationed plainclothes constables at each entrance. Pelham, for his part, had agreed to assist his loyalty to the club and to Darnley's memory now fully reawakened. I found Holmes alone in the billiard room just past midnight. Standing where Darnley had once been discovered, his face cast in soft lamplight, his fingers steepled. This, he said quietly, is where it began. You truly believe the killer seeks to finish Darnley's work? I asked. I believe, Holmes replied, that our killer does not see themselves as such. They believe they are preserving something, or protecting it. Perhaps even reviving a broken right. He looked to me. We have been trying to solve a crime, but our adversary believes they are performing a sacrament. A silence fell. Outside, the wind rose, brushing against the high windows with the mournful voice of the city at rest. Then Holmes turned to me and said something I had not heard in days. Sleep, Watson. Tomorrow will be the final move, and I shall need you sharp. The next evening arrived like a held breath. The reading hall of the St. Agatha Club had been subtly prepared, a lectern at the front, rows of leather-backed chairs arranged for a fictitious audience, and a long display table bearing an elaborate parchment and other forgery by Holmes. This one an almost perfect reconstruction of the root scroll, based on fragments and his own deductions. Shortly before 8 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Lemming, pale and nervous, took a seat near the front. Mrs. Broom, calm once again, entered under Lestrade's escort. A handful of lesser-known scholars trickled in, each believing per Holmes's plan that they were there for a private presentation of a long-lost artifact, and yet Holmes remained in the shadows. It was I who stood at the lectern, clearing my throat and opening the evening with rehearsed words. We thank you all for coming, I began. Tonight, we will unveil what Philip Darnley once described as the last piece, a reconstruction of what he believed to be the full diagram of the root drawn from the fragments he uncovered. As I spoke, my eyes scanned the crowd not for expressions of curiosity, but for that flicker of something else, urgency, recognition, fear, and then I saw it, a man at the back, dressed like a club porter, nondescript, nearly invisible, except for the way he stared not at the scroll, but at Holmes, who had now emerged quietly from the side corridor. Holmes gave a slight nod. The man turned, moved toward the door. "Now, Lestrade," Holmes called. The room erupted. Lestrade's men blocked the exits. The figure turned to run, but Holmes was already there, intercepting him with surprising speed, grabbing his coat and pulling him backward. The man struggled only briefly before collapsing into a chair, face pale and slick with sweat. Holmes stared down at him. "I believe," he said, "you've seen this scroll before." The man said nothing, but in his silence, everything began to unravel. Morning light broke gray over Baker Street, filtering through the rain-washed windows with a cold, wintry pallor. Holmes sat at the table, sleeves rolled, his violin forgotten on the sideboard. Before him lay the parchment from the queue, the medallion, the fire-damaged drawing recovered from Miss Broom's flat, and a new addition, a set of letters, hastily acquired through Lestrade's connections at the Society for Antiquarian Preservation. Holmes had slept little. He rarely did when the deeper architecture of a case began to rise from beneath the surface. "She ran not to flee," he said at last, "but to protect something. That much is now clear." I sipped my tea. "You're convinced she's not the killer?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Evangeline Broom is too burdened, not with guilt, but with knowledge. That is why she lied. That is why she returned to the club last night. Not to destroy, but to recover." "Recover what?" Holmes tapped one of the letters. "I believe she once held the original Scrolla manuscript that Darnley sought for years. A document older than any of us suspected. These letters, written between Broom and Darnley over the course of the last 6 months, reveal that they were in possession of something they referred to only as the root. It appears to have contained a series of philosophical axioms and geometric patterns, much like the diagram we found." He slid one of the letters toward me. Dated 4 months prior, it read, "The root is not a teaching, it is a forgetting. It unwinds the mind. That's why they erased it. We are digging up what was meant to be buried." "She believed it to be dangerous," I said quietly. Holmes nodded. "And perhaps she was right." Lestrade arrived not long after, stamping off the wet from his boots. His expression was unusually clipped, and I noticed a telegram in his hand. "This," he said, handing it to Holmes, "came just after dawn. It's from Cambridge." Holmes opened it with practiced ease and read. "Dr. August Lemming found unconscious in his rooms. No signs of forced entry. No memory of events between last evening and early morning. Medallion placed on desk beside him. Police baffled." Inspe Bailey Holmes handed me the paper. "Now the serpent coils again," he murmured. Lestrade frowned. "You think it's connected, of course. Miss Broom vanished last night, then Lemming is found drugged, with our familiar symbol left as a calling card. It's no coincidence, but why him?" I asked. "He wasn't central to the scroll." Holmes looked up. "Not to us, perhaps. But someone believed he still had a piece of the truth or needed punishing for once having held it." He stood suddenly and paced to the hearth. "We must reframe our understanding, Watson. This is no longer a puzzle of scholarly theft, nor even one of symbolic murder. We are now inside the shell of something older, something cultic. Darnley was not simply researching a manuscript. He was drawing too close to something someone believed must never resurface. Lestrade raised a brow. Are you saying a cult's behind this? Holmes didn't answer directly. Instead, he returned to the table and retrieved the medallion, the Ouroboros. This symbol, he said, predates Christianity. It appears in Egyptian, Greek, even Norse sources. Always the same core, the cycle, self-devouring, eternal silence. But the variant we've seen, the serpent, interrupted by a blade, breaks the cycle. It is not just a warning. It is a declaration of revolt. Someone, somewhere, has broken from an old tradition and now seeks to silence anyone attempting to reassemble it, I said. Then Darnley's death was only the first. Exactly, Holmes said. The staging, the stillness of his body, these were not acts of personal revenge. They were rituals, symbols for anyone else who might be watching. Lestrade looked uneasy. We've never dealt with this kind of thing before. Holmes smiled faintly. We've dealt with it more often than you think. Only this time, the symbols are not theatrical, they are deadly sincere. He turned back to me. There is one person left we haven't questioned properly. Who? I asked. Pelham, Holmes said. The steward of the club. He is ever present, and yet somehow conveniently absent in every crucial moment. The night of Darnley's death, the morning the parcel vanished, the day Miss Broom returned to retrieve what she had hidden. Lestrade frowned. You think he's involved? I think, Holmes said, he knows more than he's said. Perhaps he is only a witness, perhaps more. But we must press him before he, too, disappears. We arrived at the St. Agatha Club shortly after midday. The drizzle had turned to steady rain, and the streets were slick with reflections. Pelham met us at the main entrance, immaculate as ever in his gray gloves and perfectly knotted cravat. Gentlemen, he said mildly, we hoped to speak with you privately. Holmes replied. It concerns Mr. Darnley and Miss Broom. Pelham's composure did not break, but his gaze shifted slightly. Of course. The morning room is unoccupied. He led us down a corridor paneled in mahogany, its carpet muffling every footfall. Once inside, Holmes closed the door and fixed Pelham with a gaze I had come to associate with only one thing, the beginning of the end. You've worked here many years, Holmes said. 23. Sir, you know every member, every entrance, every servant. I do. And yet, Holmes said softly, you saw nothing the night Darnley died. Nothing of the parcel he brought. Nothing of the figure who may have joined him. Pelham folded his hands. I see much, Mr. Holmes, but not everything. Let us be candid, Holmes said. You were once a scholar yourself, a man of letters. Oxford, was it not? Pelham's mouth tightened. I was long ago. And yet here you are, Holmes said, a steward among men who pretend to wisdom. There was a pause, then Pelham spoke, voice low. Because I made a mistake. I once followed a man who promised secrets too deep for reason. I watched brilliance collapse into obsession. That man's name was Darnley. The room fell still. You knew him before the club? I asked. I knew him before he became what he was, Pelham said. Before the scroll, before the symbols. He was my friend. Why didn't you tell us? Lestrade asked. Because I was afraid, Pelham said. Afraid he had uncovered it again, and afraid it would start all over. Holmes stepped forward. "Then tell us what it is, Mr. Pelham," he said, "because someone else already knows. And they've just begun to kill." Chapter 12. The moment of recognition. The man sat slumped in the chair, as if the very weight of recognition had pressed the strength from his spine. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 35, with a face worn not by age, but by something inward, the erosion of conscience, the steady decay of identity shaped by long deception. Holmes stood directly before him, silent, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sharp as a blade but utterly calm. Lestrade moved in from behind. "Name," the man hesitated. His eyes flicked across the room toward Lemming, toward Broom, toward the false scroll laid on the table. Only when he saw Pelham standing at the rear of the hall, arms crossed in solemn silence, did he finally speak. "My name is Jonathan Reeve," he said. "I was a student of Philip Darnley once." I saw Holmes close his eyes, not in surprise, but in confirmation. He had known. Somehow he had known. Reeve continued, voice flat and hollow. "He taught a lecture on forbidden rituals. I was fascinated. He spoke of knowledge that rewrote history not with facts, but with symbols. Secrets you didn't learn, but remembered, as though they'd always been there, buried." "And you believed him?" Holmes asked quietly. "I did," Reeve said. "We all did in the beginning. But then the scroll appeared. The fragment he called the root. It changed everything. He became unreachable. He said it was not a manuscript but a key, that it could sever thought, break the illusions of the self, that it could strip away the false layers of time." Lestrade frowned. "That sounds like madness." I panicked. He fell strangely, silent, eyes open, as if watching something I couldn't see. He was gone. And I realized he had done it, the ritual, or part of it. I posed him, cleaned the glass, locked the door. I didn't know what else to do. Lestrade stepped forward. "You returned to burn Broom's flat." "Why, she had the remaining fragment. The one Darnley didn't have time to use. I couldn't risk it falling into another's hands. I thought I was preserving the silence." "And Lemming?" "He published the translation," Reeve spat. "He commercialized it, spread the language. I wanted to remind him. There are still consequences." Holmes had been very still. Now he stepped closer. "You still have a piece of it, don't you?" he asked. "The true root, the part Darnley feared most." Reeve looked down, and from his coat he removed a small glass vial inside it, a scrap of parchment, curled and aged, sealed with wax. "The real root, or what remained. I should destroy it," he whispered. "But I can't. It feels like a voice that hasn't finished speaking." Holmes reached forward, gently taking the vial. "It is not your burden any more." Later, in the quiet of Baker Street, Lestrade, having taken Reeve into custody, and the false scroll burned in the fireplace, I stood watching Holmes turn the vial slowly in the firelight. "What will you do with it?" I asked. Holmes did not look away from the flame. "Nothing," he said. "It is not knowledge, it is belief. Darnley believed it could change the mind. Reeve believed it could destroy it. Miss Broom believed it should be forgotten. They were all correct." I sat down across from him. "And you?" "I believe," Holmes said slowly, "that some things are meant to remain ambiguous. That truth, at its deepest, does not always reside in proof, but in the shadows it casts." He set the vial aside. "And what of the club?" I asked. The society. Will they pursue the ritual? Holmes gave a faint smile. No. They will debate. They will argue. But without the root, the rest is just echo. There was a long silence between us. Then Holmes said, almost absently, Reeve was not the villain he believed himself to be. Nor was Darnley the martyr he imagined. And Miss Broom? I asked. She will vanish again, I suspect, Holmes said, back into the folds of academia, perhaps to teach, perhaps to forget. And you? I said. Holmes leaned back, eyes drifting upward. I, he said, shall remember everything, even the things I wish I could forget. Chapter 14. Holmes closes in. The final clue. Revealed word count, approximately 1080. The rain returned to London that evening as though the city itself had drawn a breath and exhaled. A steady drizzle hissed against the windows of Baker Street, blurring the street lamps and cloaking the world in gray. Inside our lodgings, however, a different kind of clarity was forming. Holmes stood at the fireplace, hands behind his back, watching the flames with a gaze I recognized well. It was the stare of a man who had seen the final shape of the puzzle at last. Though not all the pieces had yet fallen into place, the root, he said, without preamble, was never the true danger. I looked up from my seat, where the fragments of Darnley's notebook lay, spread between 2 volumes of ancient commentary Holmes had requisitioned from the British Museum. What do you mean? He turned to face me. The scroll, the rituals, even Darnley's death, each of these was a shadow cast by something deeper. What Reeve and Darnley both misunderstood was this: the root was not an ancient doctrine waiting to be revived. It was a testament to something that had already happened. I frowned. You mean the ritual wasn't meant to be performed? Exactly, Holmes said. It was a record, a symbolic memorial. The circle of a if such a sect truly existed did not pass down rites to be enacted. They passed down warnings dressed in ceremony. He returned to the table and lifted a page from Darnley's journal. Here note the passage: those who stand within the circle do not learn. They unlearn. That is not instruction. It is a description of loss. The rituals Darnley sought to reconstruct were not tools of enlightenment. They were fragments of a disaster. I sat forward. So the scroll wasn't meant to awaken anything. It was a chronicle of forgetting, of collapse. Holmes nodded. Darnley misunderstood. Reeve misinterpreted. And Broom feared both were right. He pulled the medallion from the drawer and placed it beside the journal. The Ouroboros glinted faintly in the firelight, the serpent eternally devouring itself. This symbol, he said, represents the infinite. But the version we found, the one with the dagger breaks, that loop, someone, centuries ago, tried to end the cycle. And the root was their message to posterity, not to repeat it. At that moment, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with an envelope, and save for the wax seal bearing the same Ouroboros we had come to dread. Holmes took it without surprise and opened it with a letter knife. Inside was a single sheet. You misunderstand still. The circle was never broken. The dagger was the gate. It waits not to be feared, but to be opened again. You have held the key. No signature, no location, no indication of authorship. But Holmes studied it with the intensity of a scholar deciphering the last line of a vanishing text. This handwriting, he said, is not Reeve's, and it is not Darnley's. Watson, fetch Broom. within the hour. Miss Evangeline Broom sat in our parlor once more. She was pale but composed, and when Holmes handed her the letter, her hands trembled only slightly. "It's him," she said, confirming what Holmes had suspected, but not Reeve. "This was written by a man named Marcus Vell." "Who is he?" I asked. "A former associate of Darnley's," she said. "More myth than man, truth be told. He was expelled from the society years ago. No one's seen him in over a decade. But Darnley always believed he'd gone underground into ruins, monasteries, caves in Syria, Egypt, Spain, searching." Holmes nodded slowly. "Then Darnley's death, Reeve's descent, the fire, it was all only a prelude. The true orchestrator is Vell." She exhaled. "Darnley once claimed that Vell had found the final scroll, that he had vanished deliberately to preserve it." Holmes turned away from us, the shadows from the fire leaping across his shoulders like cloaks. "Then he has been watching all along," he murmured, "waiting, letting others bear the cost of exposure, while he remained in the dark. And now?" I asked. Holmes turned back, eyes bright. "Now he believes we possess the completed route." Miss Broom nodded. "That's what the letter means. He believes the key is here, and he wants it." Holmes glanced toward the lockbox on the mantel, the sealed container holding the true fragment of parchment, untouched since the day Reeve had surrendered it. "And he will come for it," Holmes said softly. Summoned shortly after, arrived with grim efficiency. Holmes briefed him in full, including the letter, Broom's confirmation, and his own deductions. "We set the trap," Holmes concluded. "This time, not for Reeve, but for the hand that's guided all of this from the shadows." Lestrade crossed his arms. "You're sure he'll take the bait?" Holmes turned to him with a rare, glinting certainty. "Men like Vell are not content to let the past die quietly. They demand audience, reverence, closure. He will come, not as a thief, but as a priest returning to reclaim his altar." He stepped to the window, looking out into the rain-slicked city. "Tomorrow," he said, "we return to the club one last time, but this time we won't be watching for who enters." He looked back at us, his voice low. "We'll be watching for who kneels." Chapter 15. The final gathering word count. Approximately 1090. The St. Agatha Club had never felt colder. Though the hearths were alight, it was not the chill of air, but of purpose, solemnity, that wrapped the great hall like a shroud. Requisitioning the east chamber, where he and Lestrade arranged the setting with almost surgical precision, the lockbox containing the root fragment was placed at the center of a circular table, beneath a glass bell. Around it, 7 chairs were drawn, enough for each living participant who had ever touched the artifact's path. By mid-morning, the guests arrive. Miss Evangeline Broom, veiled but resolute, took her seat with quiet gravity. Lemming followed, pale and tremulous, clutching his satchel of half-translated notes. Pelham, summoned by telegram, entered stiffly and without comment. Even Inspector Lestrade took a place, outwardly skeptical, but inwardly coiled with curiosity. I sat just beside Holmes. The final chair remained empty. Holmes addressed the room. "You have all played your parts," he said. "Some as protectors, others as seekers. But none of you know the full truth. Not yet. Today, that changes." No one spoke. The fire snapped behind us. Holmes stepped forward and gestured to the sealed lockbox. "This," he said, is not the root, it is a page, a broken piece of a language, designed not to teach but to erase. It is the echo of a ritual that once silenced an entire sect of minds, not by death, but by loss of self. What Darnley stumbled upon was never meant to be revived, and yet he turned toward the hall's great doors. One man has devoted his life to doing just that. The doors creaked open, as if on cue. A figure stepped into the threshold, tall, gaunt, wrapped in a long gray coat, damp from rain. His face was lined and sharp, the skin pulled taut over high cheekbones and hollow eyes. He removed his hat slowly, revealing streaks of white through black hair. "Marcus Vell Holmes," said. Vell inclined his head. "Mr. Holmes, I've long admired your methods. Cold, rational, fearless. But today I wonder if even you will flinch." Lestrade stood, but Holmes raised a hand. "He's not armed." He came to speak. Vell entered slowly, each footfall measured. It was never about the scroll. It was about what lay behind the words. Symbols are keys. Keys open doors. Darnley lacked the courage to step through. Reeve, the understanding. I alone saw the full design. "You orchestrated Darnley's death," Holmes said evenly. "I allowed it," Vell replied. "I needed to see if he was worthy of completing the sequence. He wasn't. He tried to sever the root, not complete it." "And Reeve?" I asked. Vell gave a faint smile. "A fevered soul. He mistook preservation for destruction. He believed silence was sacred. But the truth," he whispered, "is never silent." Holmes circled the table slowly. "And what do you believe, Mr. Vell?" "I believe," Vell said, "that the root is not just a manuscript, but a memory. A memory locked within the human mind, a map etched across centuries of subconscious fear. It was scattered. I intend to reunite it." He approached the lockbox. Holmes stepped between him and the fragment. "You believe this is the final piece," Holmes said. "But you're mistaken." Vell raised an eyebrow. "This page," Holmes continued, "was never the end. It's a decoy. The real root, the final key, was destroyed decades ago by the very cult that created it. Darnley never had it. Nor did Reeve." Holmes drew from his coat a folded letter, the one Vell had sent. "You spoke of the dagger being the gate," he said. "But it was not a gate to knowledge. It was a lock. The root was a seal. You have not been trying to open something, but to unseal what wiser minds had hidden away." Vell's face stiffened. Holmes placed the letter beside the lockbox. "You followed shadows," he said. "You mistook echoes for origins. But the ritual, the symbols, they were all designed to prevent memory, to contain madness. And you have been picking at that seal like a child playing with matches in a room full of gas." Vell stared down at the table. Then, slowly, he laughed. "You are clever," he said, "but not clever enough. You believe I am driven by obsession. You're wrong. I'm driven by remembrance. This root, this memory, it already lives inside me. The scroll is only confirmation." Holmes gave a slight nod to Lestrade. Two officers emerged from the side hallway. In a flash, they moved toward Vell, but the man made no effort to flee. He simply raised his hands. "Arrest me," he said. "But you cannot unsee what I've shown them." His eyes met mine. "You will dream of this, Doctor. All of you will." He was led from the room, silent once more. The rain was gentler as we walked home. Lestrade had taken the lockbox to Scotland Yard. Broom and Pelham both offered statements. Lemming, after much trembling, promised to retract his paper and retreat into quietude. Only Holmes remained unchanged. As we reached Baker Street, I said, "You let Vell enter freely." Holmes nodded. There was no trap that would ensnare him better than truth. And what now? Holmes removed his coat, settling back into the room like a man laying down a weight he'd carried too long. "Now," he said, "we forget." I blinked. Forget? He looked at me, and for the first time in days, he smiled faintly. "The scroll, the root, the circle of Ashnan of it can harm us, Watson, so long as we deny it power. Not by burying it, but by refusing to believe in it." He poured a measure of brandy and handed me a glass. "I've solved many things in my time," he said, "but never have I unmasked something that wished so dearly to remain unnamed." He raised his glass to silence. He said, I raised mine to peace. We drank, and outside London forgot. The streets hummed again with life, with wheels and footfalls, with laughter in taverns and bells at crossing posts. The circle remained unbroken, but for now it slept. The end.